Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss, the host of the program here at allpointstv.com. Our program is called What's Going On, and we are here every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3. And guess what? It's 2 o'clock, so we're here. Want to ask you if you know where your children are, and if you're going to find them. We all try to find the country. We're trying to locate where our country is, but if it's still here, we'll find it. may take a search warrant. You never know. Things are changing so fast. Well, I think I got my last program in for the month. This is Black History Month. And I have my last program in. I spoke at a church yesterday, the one that has me back every year. And we had a time, I think they wanted me to sit down after a while. I was up there for about maybe 45 minutes. They said, they gave me 10 minutes. And I'm coughing. That takes 10 minutes just to cough. And so I got up there and I had all my notes here, and my intentions were honorable, and I'm going to respect the time. And before I knew it, the guys on the organ hitting the little note saying, okay, now, when you going to stop talking? But, you know, they only give you so much time. And everybody else, there ain't a lot of people in the program. That's another thing. I'll make that excuse. The reason we went so late last night, because these churches meet all night. This is one of those churches that if you give them any excuse to keep on meeting, then they don't need a lot of explanations as to what how you get them into prolonging the program. You know, they say, we don't want to prolong the hour. Well, they don't mind prolonging the hour. And then the next hour, either, and some additional hours. I was at that church one time, and I made the quintessential mistake of saying that I had what was it that time? I think I had a cold or something. I said there was something in my throat. All of a sudden, that was enough reason to bring out the holy water. The guy wanted to put it in my throat, and of course he had to put it on my forehead. Then I got to be healed, and there's a person pressing on my head. That was about 2 hours of prayer. and I had a mouthful of mucus, and I could not, as they were telling everybody I was healed, I couldn't contradict them, so I had to sit there, couldn't hawk or anything, because they were telling me how good I was feeling, and I had to act like I was feeling as well as they were saying, so I couldn't even say anything from that point. But that was another 2 hours. I said, well, I can't tell them about the headache that I'm having right now by the person pressing on my head, because that'd be another hour of service, and we're already at 11 o'clock. And sometimes I'm in these neighborhoods where I'm on a certain part of the community, and I'm trying to figure out, as we were meeting until late in the night, and I had planned to be out of there in the early part of the evening, and now it's like 11:30. We still meeting. We started at 6 o'clock, and 5 hours later, we're still in there. And I'm trying to figure out, because I'm in this one area that you have to figure out your route, otherwise you may ride down there and somebody's out here thinking they are in Dodge City. So I had to figure out, how do I get out of here now? Do I go the long route, go back by the expressway? That's a long route going the opposite direction, but I can get around the city that way, or do I want to go right through the city? You have to figure these things out. We're living in those times right now. But if you can find your children, I guarantee you I'm going to look for the country, and I'm going to locate it and find it and bring it back to where it was, in fact, at about, how many years has it been now? But it was there for a while, and we got to relocate it and reposition it and recondition it so that we can get our country back. And I'm not talking here about getting it back from just one person. I'm talking about getting it back from all the leadership we have in Washington, and that includes the president and his cabinet. I'm still trying to figure out what John Kerry is doing as the Secretary of State. I can't figure that out. And then we're talking beyond that to the Congress of the United States, all of them. Well, maybe not all, because I just read the other day that Scott down in South Carolina, everybody's saying that he's doing a great job, and everybody's saying how they are really pleased with the things he's doing, and some have in polls indicated that they feel he's the most outstanding one in the Congress. Of course, the scale in which you evaluate that particular process, I mean, how well he's doing, you don't have a whole lot of competition. But I think he's a pretty honorable person. But let's be honest here, he's in a cesspool. And the Congress, I don't think, I can't say they are as bad. They're almost as bad as Obama. And then you have the Supreme Court, that's out of control. And we don't know how they'll rule because they don't follow the Constitution either. So we don't know what we'll get from that body. And we thought that at least if you had the other two bodies which might come from underneath the Constitution and start to exercise powers that's not delegated and is written in black and white in Article 1, Section 8, you would think then, okay, if they're out of balance, we have this corresponding part of the government, complementary to the other two, but antagonistic in terms of being very jealous of his own space, his own power, that delegated to its role in Article 3, and they're going to do everything they can to maintain their particular hold on power in their own domain, in that particular corridor of power in the federal government. And if any of the other two branches get out of control, they will bring them back into speed under the Constitution. That's what we thought.
But you know what's really sad about this is now that Obama's elected, seems a lot of his followers, a lot of people like him or voted for him, think they should have carte blanche. I mean, they don't. I mean, I've talked to so many people who think that he's the president and he should have like unlimited power. And I'm like, what about the Constitution? And they're like, they look at you like dismayed, like, well, we elected him, and he just let him do his job.
Yeah, John, it's amazing. I don't know what they're teaching in schools these days. You know, maybe I have to go back through there and see what is being taught right now. I've been retired from the public schools for 10 years. But I'm amazed at some of the comments I'm hearing. There was one person saying that if the president feels called upon to do something that's beyond the court's limitation of his authority, where they're saying the Constitution does not allow this, and it doesn't allow the other thing, they're saying, well, the president so feels the need to do something above the ruling of the court and what the Constitution calls for, if he feels there's a need to do it, then he ought to be able to do it. And I'm trying to figure out, what class was that again? What government class that you get in 12th grade that taught that? Because in my government class, you know, we were, and I had Mr. Vaughn back in that time period. I never forget him, God rest his soul. He was a great government teacher. And you know, he was very a stickler for understanding the document. I think it's why I know it fairly well right now, a lot of it from memory. Some of it started in his class, not all of it, but he's the one that got me excited about it. And it was just, you know, right down the line. Here's what the particular aspects of it require. Here's what it calls for. These are the things that are delegated to this particular branch of the government. The executive branch has this authority. Its basic responsibility is to enforce the law. That's in Article 2. And then we had Article 3, which was the judicial branch. We learned that that will give you the interpretation of what the language says, because it can mean a lot of things. But here's the particular organization set up to explain that to us, make sure that we are all coherent on the same page of its meaning. So in Article 3, we had that. Then in Article 1, we had this branch that was in fact making the laws within the confines of the Constitution. And they are going to make laws within the confines of where their limits are found. And their limits are found in Article 1, Section 8. So I'm learning all of this theoretical information. And the theoreticals were not at that point. I must say this. It was not that much difference between the theoreticals and the practicals involved, because they were not that far off the maybe I'm wrong in saying this because maybe I was not aware of it, but it didn't seem like they was as off the page. Well, it couldn't be as off the page as they are right now, but it seemed like there was a certain congruency between what was being stated in the Constitution and what was being applied by the government. If they were out of control, I wasn't aware of it, or as out of control as they were. My view is that maybe I got to be an adult and saw through adult lens, and it might have been bad then. I couldn't see it. But it just didn't seem to me that we had the country on automatic pilot right now, where there are so many things that are out of kilter that anything goes and everything is unpredictable. But Mr. Bond was one of those persons that, was a stickler for making sure everybody understood what the Constitution required. And he wasn't doing it for the reasons that he felt we need to be armed out there against our government. He just thought that, as citizens that are responsible citizens, you ought to know what your citizenship rights are and what's required of you and your responsibilities. And that's what he was doing. And I appreciate that. And I don't appreciate what I'm seeing right now based upon that. But make a long story short, I was as I was coming to the studio, I was thinking about the fact that what we have right now is something that make us look for the country we were born in. Because it doesn't even seem like America is America that I grew up in, and I grew up in the 50s. Now, I wasn't born in the 50s. It wasn't that far from the 50s, but it wasn't the 50s. I said I was growing up in the 50s. I didn't say I was born then. A little bit before the 50s. Not that much more, but not in the 50s. I'm not going to tell you the date because I don't want you sending me in the flowers. But, growing up, I just kind of had a starry-eyed view of the country, and I was really just great. I just thought everything was great. I was poor, but I knew that I could work out of it, and I had certain things I was doing so I wouldn't be poor in my adult years. I was in school. I was raggedy. I was poor, but I saw opportunities out there, and I was out making those opportunities available to me in the future. They weren't available now, but I was working hard to achieve at the level so that when I got out of school and got into the market, I have the skills that I could sell to whomever was willing to pay for the kinds of things I brought to the table. And I tried to bring as much as I could because I knew the better prepared I was, the more marked my skills would be. And so I was in there working hard because I saw opportunity, even though I was a very small, I lived in a very small community and had people around me who all were poor, but they had integrity, they were honest, and no bars up at that time. People can't hardly understand how that could have happened in that kind of poverty, but we didn't have the bars up. And nobody came in your house, nobody came through your windows and things like that.
I noticed that too, because when I was a kid, I grew up in a poor area, roughly poor. I mean, this area had a mix.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up right where the studio is at. But we didn't have this, we didn't have to go around putting bars on our windows all the time. We didn't worry about drive-by shootings. There was a rough bunch of people that you had to deal with, but I mean, they would fight you one-on-one in the street. But it was like, at least you knew where you stood. Yeah, but when did that happen? I mean, it's like the black community used to be, from what I understand, because it was before I was born, but it got more violent and more. They turned against each other after they got more civil liberties guaranteed to them by removing the barriers that are posed by the laws, and then they turned on each other. And I was like, well, it seemed like that. It was an observation. My parents and their friends would say, they should have it better now. Why are blacks doing this now? I mean, and they were concerned. I mean, they knew a lot of good black folks they grew up with,
Sure.
and they just saw them being victims in their own neighborhood.
John, there was a quantitative shift in consciousness. People cannot. I would tell my students when I was in public school, I would tell my students about the community I was born in, and their mouths would drop open. They could not believe that there could be that kind of poverty, and you didn't have anyone breaking into your house. That is something that's beyond their experience, because they got bars up and they still are finding ways to come into the homes and take stuff out of their houses.
If I was
they didn't do that in that time period.
If I was poverty stricken and intent to do criminal activity, I'm not going to steal from people who ain't got nothing. I'm going to go to where the wealthy people are and get their stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, they turn on each other. I mean, I don't understand. The poor people in this area, in this city, and across this country are preying upon each other.
Yes, that is a different kind of community too. And I'll tell you a story that I think seals how what change we're talking about. Was this one parent? I was at a person's house some years ago, and the two children were fighting. Not, I mean, physically beating each other, just arguing back and forth. It was about some candy that one of the children had, another child wanted some of it. So the child said, "Mommy, Johnny is trying to take my candy." And the mother said this, and I thought this was a classic. The mother said, "Well, give him some so that he won't have to take it." And that was when that was said, that threw my mind back to Birmingham, Alabama, where I was raised, in a poor community. You see, we didn't have to take it next door out of the house. because if they had it and you needed it and you asked for it, it was there for the asking. You didn't have to take it because it was available, because that's what the neighborhood did. It didn't have a lot, but what it did have, those were resources that were shared in the community. And you would go next door, you would do it now, but you would go next door and ask for flour, because they knew that you had everything else, but maybe the flour was, you didn't have the flour for the gravy, maybe in making gravy for your liver or something like that, and you would ask for some other things to make up the difference between what your house had and what the house did not have. And you would also, we all were getting government commodities, they called it, cheese and things like that, and flour, beans, rice. I was shocked when I would see people having beans and rice in the same meal. We'd have beans one day and rice, and another had beans and rice, then we'd eat on Friday. So we had divided stuff up. But what would happen is that there was one group of people in our neighborhood, they get their food came in, the supplementary, the substance that supplemented your own efforts. The government would not give you what they did right now. That's another thing that destroyed some of the fiber in the community. The government started playing the role, these bureaucrats started playing the role that neighbors were playing, and you couldn't see who was giving you stuff, and you were not getting it from the neighbors, so you couldn't see what kind of role they were playing, and that changes the paradigm in the community by the government coming in and doing something that had been done before by the charitable impulses in the community. I mean, that's like a spider web there, where you shake the spider web and every part of the web shakes. That shook that community. If you say the community is a spider web, when you shook that fabric of that community, you shook the foundation of that community. Just by that one thing that was altered in the community, by the government coming in as if it's a benevolent interest. And we don't see they stole what they took, where they took it from somebody else before they gave it out to the other person. We don't see the gun that they're wielding in their quote-unquote benevolence. They're not charitable. These people took what they took from somebody else and gave it out there for political benefits. But our community didn't operate that way. They didn't take it from anybody. They had it based on their own efforts, and whatever they could get to supplement themselves, it was available in the community, and that community was very different than it is right now. And it might have come out of that one thing that shook the fabric of the community, and it changes so many other things, because once it shakes, then the whole web is shaking, and some other things are caused by it, and before you know it, you have a different community. But they would come over to your house. When our food would come in, they'd have we were the M through the, I think we were M, N, and O. That group would be the ones that we go downtown with, and we stand in line. The line would be down this corner and around the other corner and around the other corner. Sometimes it'd be raining, and you knew you couldn't leave, because if your alphabet was for that day, you couldn't come the next day and get your commodities. You had to go on the day when your day was due, and your card said what day that would be. And so you're standing out there, rain or shine. It wouldn't be in the snow down there we're talking about during the year, but you would have, sometimes it'd be raining, be pouring down. You couldn't leave. And so you just have to take you didn't have a raincoat, didn't have an umbrella, but you have to have those commodities, because that's how you made it for that month. But what would happen is that those that were in A through L, they would have gotten their food the first of the month, and then the M, N, and O, they would go in like in maybe the second week or so of the month, and then those that are coming after them would get their food at a certain time. But what has happened in the community is that those that were in the first part of the alphabet, by the time we're getting our food in, their food is going down. So all of a sudden at dinner time, maybe sometimes at breakfast, they show up at your house. And when they asked for something, you didn't tell them that you weren't their parents. They knew that. That's too much information. What you did was go in there and begin to half the amount of food that was being served. They were not there, and you cut it down some on everybody's portion, and you gave them a portion of it. Now, how are you going to take anything in that environment? If you ask for it, it's yours, and there's no need to take it because you know it's available. And I tell you another thing. We had one TV set in the whole neighborhood. And I tell you what those kids were doing. All the males, we were watching those cowboy pictures. I mean, every cowboy picture came on, we were watching that. And we were around there playing cowboys and Indians too. So you can't see me and stuff about if you were out there, making a gingerbread cookie and mixing in the form of a gun, you're gonna go out there and shoot somebody. we took coat hangers and fold them back and bent them and had that the part that you hang up on the on the to hang the clothes up with, we would have that as a trigger. We would fold it, you know, how you fold it in and you put it over this way, and you make it into a gun like, and then the part you hang the coat on that you hang it from the closet, you would have that as a trigger. And we go around there, you know, playing cowboys and Indians. Nobody got shot, and we didn't think about getting a gun after playing cowboys and Indians and shooting somebody with a real gun. Didn't happen. But we what we did was to in our community, we made use of each other's resources. And in that neighborhood, they had one TV set. Not everybody had a TV at this time. Yeah, we were kind of at the beginning. I mean, these Milton Berle and those persons that made TV what it was, Red Skelton, those persons. And don't forget our cowboy pictures. And when we came to this one house, because this person had, his dad was a principal. I won't call his name out because I don't know if he's still alive or not. I don't know if you want me to mention his name. Good friend of mine. I will say, well, you see, we call him Sonny. And we'd all meet at his house. And, you know, that's another thing. And when we meet at the house, it's like those computers are for us right now. When I was coming up, we didn't have computers. We had TV sets. So when the adults had come up, they didn't have television. They had radio. So they would never know the plot. And we were in this room. There may be about 20 kids in the room. Every kid in the neighborhood is in that room. We are sitting around on our hands on the floor around the TV set, and the adults are sitting in their chairs. They may have 2 chairs in the room, and the adults never knew what was going on. And so everybody's quiet because we didn't want to miss what the Long Ranger was saying. That's blasphemy. So in that room, everybody is so quiet. You can hear a church mouse going to the restroom on cotton. That's how quiet it was. Nobody would talk. The adults were quiet, and we would only find out during the commercial break. And Long Ranger, by the way, was brought on TV by Merita Bread. You cannot beat a loaf of Merita. That was their quote. And I was looking for Merita Bread every time we bought bread. I looked for Merita Bread. I was disappointed when I couldn't find it because I thought that if it brought the Long Ranger on, it had to be the best bread in town. So the commercial would come on, and what would happen in that room is that the adults would ask us, what's going on? They could not understand the plot because that was not their instrument through which they communicated with. We were raised with television. They only had 3 channels, and you got to make a choice because you got 3 channels, and this one got that on there, and that's not good, and over here that's not good, and the third choice that's bad too. So now you got to make a choice, make a selection between 3 choices: ABC, CBS, and NBC. You know, you got 100,000 choices now. You paying for them, and you can only watch 1 or 2. You only watch 1 or 2 anyway, but you have a lot of choices there. So I would explain to the adults what was going on. I was always the one that would be able to. I would be the one to volunteer to tell them what was taking place, because I could tell you the plot of my cowboy pictures. I knew the plot. The good guys wearing riding this kind of horse, this color horse. This guy in the black hat, that's a bad guy. I could, explain the plot to the people. Then the program come back on, silence again, and we out there. But what's going on in that house is that we're around old people, and old people around young people, and that's just as natural as breathing in that neighborhood. And you never heard anyone in that community where old people, who are the most vulnerable members in that community, were being jumped on by young people. You know why? Because in that community there, we saw them playing a vital role. Our parents across town working, and we out there playing, and guess what's happening? They're old people sitting on the front porch, and they're watching everything we do. And when our parents come home, they give them a full report. That's how the community operated. Now, when you say, well, what happened? Well, a lot of things happened, but one of the things that happened is those roles were being played by community members, someone that took that away from us, and it took away from us for political reasons. And they began to play that role themselves for their own benefit, not for our benefit, because that didn't benefit us. That hurt us. And it continues to hurt us as they play a more and more of a role in our lives. We can't even choose our doctors right now.
Well, no, it's like you grew up in the time when people used to get the commodities. Like when I was a kid, the people who were on welfare a lot of times would get the peanut butter, and they get a big can of it, and they'd also get cheese. Like that cheese actually made the best macaroni cheese out there.
It was good cheese.
Yeah, and it's like my mom was actually teaching people here because a lot of women would get it, but they would just make it for they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to do this cooking. And she goes, we can use it for this. You can use. So she, and actually down here at the school, the elementary school, the community school director contacted my mom. She came down and showed people. They had a couple of ladies would come in and show these women who were getting, stuff like that from the government. The food stuff. The commodity stuff. They teach them how to use that in their everyday, prepare dishes with that, so to feed their families, because they just they're to get dependent already at that time on prepackaged food, but their food stamps, back to those food stamps, not the bridge card, the food stamps are only going so far. And my mom said, well, plus they were still getting some of the commodity things, back, this is like the 70s. And so they were showing these, they were saying, well, you can make these, you can make peanut butter sandwiches, you can add this to this peanut butter, you can make cookies. And they were showing, they had classes for the women to come to. My mom and other women would teach them how to use that stuff they got from the government to actually make family food big enough to, dishes big enough to feed their families decently, So, I mean, my mom, we didn't get the commodity stuff, but we were raised around people who had it. And my mom showed them how to do it. You just take this, you can add this, you can blend this up and use this here, and you can take. And it was really escape because Americans at that point already are getting towards they wanted to go to the McDonald's or the fast food places, and but you never even said. But even all the years that you and I have talked about, you never actually said to eliminate support for those who are in need.
No,
you never have.
You compliment the efforts. Sometimes the efforts are the best efforts they can do, and you are being charitable by making up the difference. The government came in and they wanted to play the total role, took the role the community was playing out of the community's hands, and you have this discombobulation of the community that you see right now as a result of it. We don't trace it back to the government, but a lot of that does go back to the government coming in and intervening and getting in between one citizen and another citizen. Now they're standing in the gap, and they're playing that role, and you can't see who these persons are. Now, if they could see that their community hands are still on the charity, just that the government took it and gave it back out in their own name, if they could see that part of it, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. But they don't see that part.
I see. I wonder how much of it have we actually
that way.
How much we've actually seen an increase on the people who are so poverty stricken that they have to be dependent upon the government for everything. Now that it is in the national government's hands, there is no community oversight. There's no many. And let's face it, there at times if you had an abusive person who was, just going through the kids' money or the food around my neighborhood, there'd be a social pressure or peer pressure on them not to engage in that kind of behavior. But now everything's dismissible. Everybody's a victim. Mm-hmm. The guy's an alcoholic and beating his kid. He's a victim. There's no impetus for him to change because now that's just folded into him how bad the society is. It's so dysfunctional. He's doing this and he can't help himself.
Yeah, that's another thing, John, too, that I can say from my own experience. I never felt like I was a victim. I was poor, but I didn't see that as overwhelming of my future. My poverty was in the present. What I had willed myself to be in the future was someone that was not suffering that debilitating condition I was in the present time period. I understood where I was, but I was not going to be there based on my own effort in the futures to come. I was working toward that, so I didn't see myself as a victim. I saw myself as disadvantaged in terms of materiality. My parents couldn't do for me what some other parents were doing for their children, and they were better dressed than I was, but I was going to the same class that we were in, and I was competitive in those classrooms. And they were not going to be able to outwork me because I found a way to make sure I did my homework and things like that. And I was working myself out of my poverty. When they were laughing at me in the classroom, they didn't see that, that didn't bother me because I was not going to let them do to me what I saw them doing to some of the other kids who were poor in that classroom where they were, there's one girl named, her name was Annie Mae. Her last name, everybody would know if I call it, but they always talked about her clothes and said that she smelled and things like that. And when she came to the classroom, they started holding her nose and jump over to the side. And they ran that girl out of the classroom. And I sat in the back of that room watching that. And I said to myself, they ran her out of here. She didn't come back to school anymore, but they're not going to run me out of here. And I stayed in there and I took the taunts. And when I go back to school right now, when I've spoken to some of the, at the annual events they may have at my old high school, and they may ask me to, be the speaker and things like that because I became principal. I had a school of my own, and so you go back there, and my first question to them was, that when I tell this to other students I speak to in other schools where I go around and speak in the state, and I say that my first question to those persons that were doing all that taunting and things like that is I asked them, that, okay, that was then, this is now, how do you like me now? Because I didn't leave.
Now, the high school you went to, that was kind of significant. That's Parker High School, correct?
Parker High School.
Yeah, because I have a friend who lives in Alabama, and I was talking to her about you one day, and we were talking about the shows we were doing in the studio, and mentioned you went to Parker, and she just said, "Oh my God, that was a great school," and she goes, "It's significant." She lives in this a town far away
Yeah, I'll tell
from
you.
Birmingham, but maybe close to an hour away from
sir.
and she knew all, but she went to school at UAB down in Birmingham,
Yeah.
so she knew about Parker. Yeah,
Parker was a school that if you said Parker High School, you were saying something like you were saying this school that they had in Washington, D.C., that everybody talks about, Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School. Everybody knew that school because that was one of the Cadillacs of the country. And if you said Parker High School in Birmingham, they knew what that school, what you meant. We had, in fact, R.C. Johnson was the principal of that school. His daughter married Colin Powell. Or let me put it the other way. Colin Powell married R.C. Johnson's daughter. Emma Johnson was her name. And this man was a very strong disciplinarian, and he stood out in the hallway. Didn't say a whole lot to you. You just knew he was there, and you knew you didn't want to go down there to see him. And he just ran that school, and we had 2,000 students in there. Most of them were poor. They were not as poor as I was. I was one of the poorest ones, I think, at the school. I spent my lunch hour in the library because I didn't have anything to eat, so I was. Okay, so anyway, I went to the library, and what I was doing, they didn't see this. I was in the library during my lunch hour, and I was in there booking, and I was working out of it. Now, Parker High School, you couldn't go to a better high school. It had 2,000 students in it. My graduating class had 413, and that's as large as I think the high school right now. In fact, they have the combined middle high school. They have the middle school and the high school combined. I don't think they have. I could be wrong now, but I've heard some numbers out there recently, and those numbers are. I'm talking about the ninth grade. I won't even tell you the numbers of the ninth grade because if those are the numbers, then there's a problem. They got a problem in the future because if you don't have a large ninth grade with all of the dropout that you have along the way, 10th grade, you have some drop off, they're 16 years old, they can leave. Really, they've already left, they just haven't left the building. You see, they drop out in 4th grade, but they leave when they get to 9th grade. We think they drop out in 9th grade. They don't drop out in 9th grade. They dropped out in 4th grade. They left the building in 9th grade. So if the numbers are what I heard in 9th grade there, then there's some serious problem because if you don't have a large 9th grade class of about 200, then that means as you go up that scale, your number's going to fall off, and so it doesn't become at some point viable. But and I had and I had people tell me when I was in school and I went to college, there were people telling me, well, George, I was in the class that you were in, and you didn't have blah blah blah, and I had more than you. And how you in college? And how did you? What happened? Because they got married out of high school. And I told them that what happened was that you quit, and I didn't. And I was not going to let you make me quit. And, what I can tell people today, and I can tell them from my own experience, is that if you don't, then you may well stop, but you cannot be stopped. And I testified to that because in my own experience, if I had stopped, I would never have done anything. Because there was a lot of reasons why I could have stopped. I could have made a lot of excuses and say, well, I'm just giving up here because, not eating every day and 5 cents for breakfast. That's what you had for breakfast. You had 5 cents. I buy me 2 for a penny cookies. There'd be 10 cookies. And I crumble them up in my pocket. And I take a little of it out and I do that. And by the time the day was over, I had enough crumbs in my mouth. I could function in that classroom. That's what I was doing. But what I didn't do is I didn't leave the building. Evans left the building. I didn't leave the building. I stayed in the building. If you stay in the building, everything that's happening, everything that happens in life, it happens inside of a building. Have you noticed that? Don't nobody ever build anything, outside of some kind of construction. I mean, you might be you might be Steve Jobs, and you might have to work in your garage, but there's some kind of structure you're working in. Everybody's in the building somewhere. So my point would be, don't leave the building. I mean, it's whatever building something is going on in, stay in that building. And don't be outside the building, because not too much going on outside the building. A lot goes on inside the building. If something is going on that's kind of bringing you forward, stay in there until you finish what the building has to offer you.
Like Woody Allen says, the 80% of success is showing up. Okay, and
That's it.
Being in the right place at the right time, being there. You know.
You got to show up, and if you show up, I guarantee you this. I would tell my students this: that here's one thing I'll guarantee you. I can absolutely guarantee this: if you do not quit, I can guarantee you that if you do not quit, then you will not be stopped. That's a guarantee. And that's the only guarantee I can make. I couldn't tell them that you're going to get an A on the test if you put your book under your pillow and you try to study through the osmotic process. I couldn't say that. That wouldn't be true. But what I could testify to is that if they continue to work their program, I don't care what the opposition is. You know, and John, that's what I credit my teachers with. You know, we were talking before we went on the air. John and I were talking about, John was telling me about the teachers that he had, and I was talking about, I couldn't tell what my teachers thought politically, because they weren't in the classroom coming from behind whatever views they had. I couldn't tell what the views were. I knew one thing. They in my English class, Mrs. Reed thought writing a sentence was important, and being able to get subject and verb agreement, that was very important to her. And if you wrote something that was not in agreement, you're going to hear from her. And if you didn't pass that paper in, she required a paper every Friday. I don't think she was reading all of it, but she certainly read that one on that one day when I passed it in. I read my paper, and I wrote another paper for a guy named Adolph. I won't give his last name. I know his last name today. But I wrote his paper in mine, too. And she brought us both up to her desk, and she said, I don't think you wrote these papers. She said, Adolph, you tell me what's in that paper. I don't think you wrote it. And he hadn't written it. I had written it. And I had written it out the hour before he came to her class. He asked me to write it, and I wrote it during that hour before he came to her class. And she had taken it home and read those two papers. She thought both of them were, she knew it came from the same author, but she thought that it came out of a book. And she called us both up there and told him first, tell what's in the paper. He couldn't do it. And she told him to sit down. And then she turned to me and she said, okay, what's in your paper? And I began to tell her, and this is in the paper, and that's in the paper. And she had this authority about herself. She waved me quiet. She waved her hand, and that meant shut up. And I stopped. She said, okay. She said, you wrote it. Now you go back and sit down. And I went back and sat down. I had about 15 minutes in the class period before the class period was over. I didn't have any attitude, but because she had falsely accused me, I was, when I went back to my seat, having understood what that was about, was she was saying that that paper was written in such a level, she didn't think a high school student had written it. And when I went back to our seat, I sat there for the last 15 minutes of that class period, and I sat there absolutely in awe of myself. Because I knew then, that was in 12th grade, I knew then that all that time that I didn't have lunch, I was spending in the library, and I had been going in there reading books and finding out how the writers put their sentences together. I had learned to construct sentences myself. And I sat there for the last 15 minutes of that hour just on cloud nine. I was just thinking, wow, I'm pretty good. And every time I write, I got up this morning, wrote my article on Facebook. Got to do that every day, particularly in these times when you got to have more community outreach. So I write every day on Facebook. And I have been writing in Mrs. Reed's name ever since. And I said that yesterday in my last presentation for this month. I said that yesterday at this church, that I write in Mrs. Reed's name. And in fact, they had a teacher there that came, heard I was going to be the speaker there, and she came. She's one of my former colleagues out there. And she was there, came over to join in the festivities and the last Sunday of the month, and she was there, and I was very glad to see her. And I told her that when they had what they called the Legends Day, where they brought a lot of us back and said we were the legends of the community, and I don't think I'm a legend, but I think I made some contribution out there. And I told her that if they did not have her there, then the Legends Day was incomplete, because she was definitely a legend, one of the best teachers that has come through that school. Her classes were always orderly, and everyone knew that when that bell sounded for that classroom, that classroom met at that time. Didn't meet 5 minutes after the bell sounded. They knew that. And if they were in your room, under your jurisdiction, they ran to her room because they knew that was required. And there was nobody saying, well, so-and-so had me over there doing this. You had to be in her classroom at that time. And that's the way she required it. And in saying that yesterday, it was just a treat to see her at this program. Now that brings me to what I want to talk about the last few minutes of this program, because I want to talk a little bit about Malcolm X. Malcolm X had the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X was Saturday of last week. And Malcolm X was assassinated on the 21st of February, 1965 in the Audubon Ballroom. And it is really quite amazing to me when I think about it that nobody has at this point put together what really happened in the Nation of Islam. What was the friction about between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad? I'm going to tell you why that's a problem and why people have not figured this out. It's because when you go back and read a book that came out, I think it came out after Malcolm X's assassination, but he was actually giving his autobiography to Alex Haley. But if I remember correctly, the book wasn't published until after the assassination, so Malcolm never read the book in its finished form. But he certainly had completed the book. He might have wanted to go back through it and change some things, but that would have been a disaster for the book. He tried to change it once before, and Alex Haley prevailed upon him not to do that because you change your mind about some things now, and so you might want to go back through it and kind of change some things you said earlier, but leave it as it is and let it reach its climatic end. And that's what eventually happened. But the reason why people cannot figure out what's going on in terms of the split that occurred in Nation of Islam is because Malcolm does a couple of misdirections inside of the autobiography. There are some things in the book that Malcolm consciously changed the time frame so as to put the appearance that he was more innocent in the dispute than he actually was. And it took me a while to understand that myself until I began to go back through the book, which I had read a long time ago, and then with some information that's coming out to put some other things into place and get the chronology straight. Now, in the autobiography, it's called The Autobiography of Malcolm X, is told to Alex Haley. So Malcolm is actually speaking through the writer, because Malcolm was not a writer, but he was, Malcolm was not an author. So he's actually telling this book to Haley, and Haley is putting it into words that make it, flow like a book should flow. Paragraphs got to be, flowing, the sentence got to be flowing, and things like that. That's his job to put that together. But it's really Malcolm's story. But what Malcolm does in the autobiography, that it took me a while to understand that this is what had happened, and it has thrown off everyone that's trying to understand what happened. So I'm going to do something a little bit. There's something new here that I'm going to say about what happened in the Nation of Islam, and I'm going to also tell the scholars the reason why you cannot figure out this thing for yourself is because you keep on getting off on a tangent. You say things like this, for example. You'll say when you're trying to figure out, who killed Malcolm, you go and start talking about he was poisoned in Egypt. Well, let me ask you, did he die in Egypt? And I think we'll all agree he died in the Audubon Ballroom. So you can just get off that tangent. Then you'll say he went to France and Charles de Gaulle, didn't want him off the plane because he was fearful that Malcolm was going to be assassinated in France, and that's why they didn't let him off the plane. And so now there are people trying to kill him over in France. Well, he didn't die in France, so that's another distraction. What I want to do here is stay focused on those circumstances closing in on Malcolm X that actually caused his death. Now, everything else you see on the other side there, leave that alone, and let's get to the fact that he was killed at the Audubon Ballroom and who those persons are that's in the Audubon Ballroom that day. Because that's how we're going to get to resolve this issue of who killed Malcolm and what happened in terms of why he got thrown out of the Nation of Islam. Now, Malcolm does a couple of things in his autobiography that I didn't catch him at when I read this book in 1966. Because it came out in 1965, but in 1966, when I first read this book, I was fascinated with this book. But I didn't have enough information, really, because so much has come out since that time period, to really catch Malcolm at his own theatrics in his book. what Malcolm did in the autobiography was that he tried to act like that he had heard through another source, basically Elijah Muhammad's son, who had enlightened him about the children that Elijah Muhammad had with some of his private secretaries. Now, I can say a lot of things about that. I have some things that are conjectural, but I think I get it on pretty solid ground in terms of how I figured this out. I think Malcolm was actually feeding that. Now, Malcolm can claim that he was not doing that, but Malcolm was actually sending those girls into where Elijah Muhammad was. And what Malcolm does in his autobiography shows there were two sides of his personality always operating, a conscious side and one in the background. And you see examples of that over and over again, particularly in the epilogue, where Malcolm is going back through his childhood, going back through the time he's out there lindy hopping, and he was up there discussing it one day, and he was a man that was ascetic, a man who had transformed himself, a man that was very disciplined, and before you knew it, jumped up and started doing the lindy hop again. And when Malcolm caught himself, he sat back down. You see, when you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you find Malcolm's discipline was that Malcolm was fighting to make sure he never got out of control. So there are two things operating in Malcolm all the time. One is that conscious Malcolm. They know he's conscious of he was once on the street, and he's determined not to be that person again. He's always on guard against that. But that two-ness is still there. The Malcolm of the street and the Malcolm is the reformed Malcolm X. And this man has cleaned himself up, became ascetic. Read this in this book right here by John Carew. I won't read it, but I'll tell you what is in it. And that is when Malcolm was over there in London, there were people that were around Malcolm because he was a very attractive person, very articulate. People liked him. Women were around him and things like this. And what John Carew would say is that what they realized very quickly is that Malcolm did not mess around. Now, when Malcolm found out that that wasn't true of Elijah Muhammad, he wants to claim that that information was given to him by another party. But the fact is, when you put the date together, Malcolm went to do something that he would never have done in a time period when he was a true believer in what Elijah Muhammad was teaching. Malcolm knew, and this is the rule of the Nation of Islam, and this is critical to those that want to study what went on that caused this tension between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm. I'm talking about Malcolm's role in this part here. Because what Malcolm's role was is that when those girls were in isolation, because when you got pregnant in the Nation of Islam and you weren't married, you were put in isolation. What Malcolm did, and I got the date in which he did it, he went to those girls in quarantine, and that's a no-no. That is an absolute no-no. Those girls are in isolation. And in the Nation of Islam, anyone that's in isolation, then those that are in good standing with the Nation of Islam are not to have any contact with them. And Malcolm didn't even have contact with his own brother when his brother was in isolation. When Raymond was put out the Nation of Islam because he had done something in violation of the laws, he didn't even talk to his brother. But Malcolm was over talking to his secretaries. And the date of that discussion is December the 10th, 1962. That's critical. Now, why is Malcolm over there? Well, a lot of things, but basically what it is that Malcolm's out there talking all these things about his great teaching and so on and so forth. And Dick Gregory had come up to Malcolm one day, and he said, man, Malcolm ain't nothing but a, and Malcolm in the autobiography doesn't mention what Dick Gregory said to him. He says to Dick Gregory, when Gregory said that, Malcolm's face lit up. He wanted to attack Dick Gregory. And Gregory, as he says in the autobiography, being from the street, knew Malcolm was upset and was smart enough to lead Malcolm away from that conversation in total. And Malcolm says in the autobiography, he could not tell Dick Gregory not to say that to anyone else he said to him because that would be admitting that that would be true. But Malcolm's hunted by that. He's hunted by the fact that he's out here making this man up to be the ascetic person that he was, projecting pretty much his own self off on his leader. And it looks to him like he's being made a fool of, a man that doesn't know what's going on in his own organization. That bothered Malcolm. Now, what Malcolm will say later on is that him taking that information that he now has from the secretaries. And they tell him that on December the 10th, 1962, that Elijah Muhammad is saying that Malcolm is the greatest minister he's ever had, and he was the greatest leader, the most disciplined person he's ever had, and so on and so forth. But he also tells them that one day Malcolm X is going to leave him, and therefore he's dangerous. And he's telling him that in 62. And that hurts Malcolm. And then this comes up. So Malcolm now is going around and whispering in the ear of the ministers in the Nation of Islam. Now Malcolm will say this. Here's what Malcolm says. And the scholars have not figured this out yet because they took the side of Malcolm X or they take the side of Elijah Muhammad. I'm not taking either one of them side. I'm interested in what the truth is. And what Malcolm did, he said that he was telling the ministers and the captains, like Captain Joseph Gravis over there in New York, that he was trying to make sure that if the news broke that these children belonged to Elijah Muhammad, they could teach it as divine revelation. David had done it. Look at Solomon had many wives, all of that, and you could put the fire out. Let me tell you this, that's nonsense. The reason why it's nonsense is because anything that the quote-unquote press would have said about Elijah Muhammad, all that would have done was solidify his forces around him. Because look what they were calling these persons outside of the race. They call them devils. So that if anybody has said anything about Elijah Muhammad, all that's going to do is bring the rallying point around him. So Malcolm was not pouring water on a raging fire. You know why? There's no fire to put out. What Malcolm is doing is what is the worst thing that can go on in Nation of Islam, and that is what they call planting seeds. And what Malcolm is doing is that Malcolm is in fact planting seeds in the Nation of Islam, and it's interpreted that way by his followers. Why is Malcolm X whispering? And he's not whispering about just anybody in the Nation of Islam. He's whispering about the leadership. And they go back and tell Elijah Muhammad that's what Malcolm is in fact doing. And then, when you understand that, and you get to September 1963, Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad are in Philadelphia, and there are 5,000 Muslims out there in the audience. And Elijah Muhammad does this. He does something he hadn't done over the 12 years Malcolm has been inside the Nation of Islam, having built it from a group that only had enough members in 2 station wagons, and now there's this large group. And Elijah Muhammad does this in front of 5,000 followers. He embraces Malcolm X in front of those followers in September of 1963, and he says to those members out there, this is my most faithful member, my most honest and great disciple, my most trusted confidant, and he'll follow me until he dies. The Judas kiss. Malcolm wasn't dealing with a fool here. Elijah Muhammad had told those secretaries in 1962 Malcolm would one day leave him, and therefore Malcolm was dangerous. And what he was doing in September, he was making sure when the break, which was inevitable, he was making sure that when the break came, Malcolm would get the blame for it because he embraced Malcolm on that particular occasion. And 5,000 Muslims saw Elijah Muhammad embracing Malcolm. And when Malcolm spoke at the Manhattan Center on December the 1st, 1963. First, let me say this. In November the 10th of 1963, when Malcolm gave what is considered his greatest speech called Message to the Grassroots. Now, another speech is called Ballads of Bullets, but that's after he's out of the Nation of Islam. That's in 64. One in Philadelphia, one in Detroit. This one is at the Southern Baptist Church, November the 10th, 1963. And in that speech, what is really interesting in that speech is there's not one reference in that speech to Elijah Muhammad. September, Elijah Muhammad tells Malcolm he'll follow me. He'll say to the members, Malcolm will follow me till he dies. Malcolm is speaking in November the 10th. Not one mention of Elijah Muhammad's name. And that's a shift in Malcolm in that talk. Because what a person will tell you about Malcolm is that everything he said, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us. The Honorable Elijah wasn't saying that in that speech. Something has happened in that relationship. Then Malcolm goes the next month, December the 1st. Elijah Muhammad gets sick. He had asthma and other conditions, bronchitis. They had paid for the auditorium. Couldn't get their money back. They didn't want to lose the opportunity to speak, so Malcolm spoke. But they'd been told, do not say anything about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Malcolm in his earlier days would have taken that as sacrosanct. The messenger said don't speak, and Malcolm would not have spoken. But on this occasion right here, what Malcolm did was that he had his notes down there. He did not talk about the Kennedy assassination, but then he did something with that two-ness I was talking about before. He opens up the floor, knowing the question was going to come up. So here's Malcolm acting like he's complying. He was complying with his notes. But what did Malcolm expect to happen when he opened the floor up? And there is Helen Dudar out there, one of the reporters for the New York Post. And the first question comes up, Minister Malcolm, what do you think about the assassination of Malcolm X? Well, you open it up, you can close it back down again. You could have said no comment, but Malcolm says it's a chicken coming home to roost. And Elijah Muhammad saw that as a trail of tears going on in terms of Malcolm being in defiance of Elijah Muhammad, which he was. That's the problem right there. Now, you can say the morality was a problem, but let me tell you something. And this is something you can learn from all of you out there that think that you can have no dispute without resorting to your gun. They did that in 1965 with Malcolm X. What you need to understand is that your differences cannot lead to you tearing up everything and shooting everybody. That's what Malcolm's life is, because if you have a disagreement, you don't tear the organization up. You have to recognize that's a flaw, but you have to take Booker T. Washington's idea that you don't allow your grievances to blind you to your opportunities. And Malcolm got blinded by the fact that his leader did not have the ascetic lifestyle that he had. Well, let me ask you, so what? Because that's also true of Dr. Martin Luther King. Some of you that are ascetic, I don't think you're all that ascetic yourself. You think you're hypocrites, but let's say that some people don't live up to your standards in all different ways. So maybe they're great over here and not so great somewhere else. Well, we all are that way. Some of us are great over here, then we're over there, and some are great over there, then over here. That's the way it is. You're not going to be perfect in all of the domains. Somewhere you're going to have a weakness somewhere, and you've got to be able to make up for it. Maybe with some of your strengths, you make up for it. So Malcolm is not going to overlook that, and he's in defiance of Elijah Muhammad. And that whispering that he did to those ministers around there were looked at for what it was. He's not pouring water on a raging fire. He's creating a fire. And Elijah Muhammad tells him, go put that fire out that you started in that forest. Because you don't walk through a forest with gasoline. You walk through a forest with water. And he was coming up against the leadership. And that split causing him to react a certain way outside, and they're reacting a certain way outside. And before you know it, this dispute is now heating up, and the inevitable result of it is what you saw that took place in the Audubon Ballroom. Let me just say this before we get off the air. We have all the ones in the Audubon Ballroom. We can even reconstruct how the assassination was carried out. Those persons that killed Malcolm X came out of, first of all, I'm going to make some news right here, I think, by saying that I don't think there are 5 shooters in the Audubon Ballroom. I think 5 persons in terms of the assassination team in the Audubon Ballroom. I think there's 6 in there. I think the reason why Thomas Hare will claim that there were 4 along with him, he will eventually talk about those persons involved in it. He'll say there were 5, including himself, in the Audubon Ballroom. They all came out of temple number 25. But I think there's a 6th person in there. But Hare is not aware of the 6th person because that person comes out of temple number 7. That's Thomas Butler 3X. Norman Butler 3X was the other party. The 4 others that came out of Newark, Temple 25, those are the ones he does know. One of them is William Bradley. William Bradley, who was working with Cory Booker, who's now the senator from New Jersey. He's still alive, and he's never paid the price for that. When you do the research on this, those who want to do additional research, go and find out why the bodyguards that were standing up there at the rostrum reacted the way they reacted. They're part of it. Find out about a person by the name of Linwood Cathcart. He didn't do any of the shooting, but he was in there from the Newark Temple, sitting in the front row. He's over there laughing when Malcolm got shot. That guy was sitting there as a supervisor. The other names, you can name, let me see, some of these other persons. I got them all written down here. Albert Benjamin, Thomas, Leon Davis, William McKinley. These are the ones that are in there, the ones that created the disturbance and caused the part of the hit team. But there were others in there also, and Malcolm's bodyguards were part of it. Their names are Robert 35X Smith and Charles 26X Blackwell. They were part of it as well. And their job was to stay in front of that podium, and they left that podium and left Malcolm Burnham up there on that stage. And they never acted appropriately the whole time the assassination was carried out. They were part of it as well. Okay, got to get out of here. Malcolm's 50th anniversary is important. Need to stay tuned to how that played down, and then don't forget to, use the rest of the month to study some Black history. We'll see you next week. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.